Fantastic. All right. Beatriz, it's so great to see you.
Great to see you too. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. We've got our seniors joining us. You can probably see the square there somewhere in the corner that's
yes, hi.
Joining us. And then we've got a bunch of other folks coming in from different departments. I see some folks from sustainability, which is awesome. And some of my first year seminar students, which is fantastic.
Also the team from the studios here.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're all camping here and eating sandwiches. We're in Massachusetts.
Oh, wonderful. That's so great. So excited.
Hi.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and get started if everybody's all right. We'll probably get a few more folks floating in. I wanted to just welcome Beatriz Cortez. She's a friend of mine. We went to grad school together at CSUN for our MAs. I'm so happy that she could be here today. Beatriz received an MFA from the California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, and a PhD in Literature and Cultural Studies from Arizona State. Beatriz's work explores simultaneity, life in different temporalities, and different versions of modernity, particularly in relation to memory and loss in the aftermath of war and the experience of migration, and in relation to imagining possible futures. She's had solo exhibitions at the Craft Contemporary Museum, Los Angeles, Monte Vista, Ballroom Marfa, the Hammer, Whitney Museum. Beatriz is one of the hardest working artists I know. And I'm just super thrilled that she can make the time to be here with us today and also spend some time with the seniors. So as of right now, I know you're where in Massachusetts, right? Okay, great. Cool. Well, we're happy to have you. She also teaches, by the way, in the Department of Central American and Transporter Studies at CSU Northridge, and is represented by Commonwealth and Council. So she's very busy and out there making amazing things all the time. So thrilled to bring Beatriz in here, and I'll go ahead and let you take it away. You should be able to share if you want to share screen.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kate, for the invitation to visit the program virtually. I hope to visit in person one of these days and see your office. I'm so happy to visit your program and see you there. I'm a great fan of Kate's work and her explorations of virtual spaces and glitch, culture and speculative worlds. I have been here at Mass MoCA talking to everybody about how, we should contact Kate and see what we should be reading about glitch things. And so we'll be in touch soon to talk to you about that. But I wanted to say that I have known her for years, and due to the pandemic, I haven't been able to see Kate. And so I'm really happy to be able to spend this time together talking about art. And let me start sharing my screen so that we can first begin by reading a quote by Elizabeth Gross that says, "Life is that which spreads, not from the organic to the inorganic, but runs between them, an impersonal force of contraction, dilation that characterizes events, even non-living events, as much as they do life itself. This is not when a lucid consciousness knows its object, but that moment when a consciousness follows and joins matter, when matter and life align to form art, a moment Deleuze and Guattari describe as artisanal metallurgist." And so I'm going to begin there. Today, I want to tell you about the underworld and about the life that flourishes under the surface of the earth. And I want to tell you about the flows of the planet and about particles of the underworld adrift in the atmosphere. And I want to tell you about bodies, some of them larger than others, and about their entanglements, their movements, their breathing, their way of becoming one another. But I want to begin by speaking of matter, of queer matter. By this, I mean matter that can be defined, and yet we don't know where it's been or where it's going. It is matter that moves away from identity towards the emergence of spontaneous and self-organizing collective nomadic subjectivities, and potentially towards life. It is matter that flows and disappears, or as Candice Lynn would say, it's about the queer and entangled lives of matter. As Elizabeth Gross points out, life is that which spreads, not from the organic to the inorganic, but runs between them, an impersonal force of contradiction and dilation that characterizes events, even non-living events, as much as they do life itself. So let me go back to these ideas one at a time. Since ancient times, in what we now call Mesoamerica or Central America, which is the region of the planet where I was born, there is the idea that mountains move. There was the belief that a snake of massive proportions lived under the surface of the earth, and as it moved, it shaped and transformed the landscape. In other words, as it exposed curved sections of its monumental body, it moved mountains at a speed that could barely be perceived by humans, like the speed of a hyperobject. The earliest group of people who recorded this motion on the planet, the movement of the mountains on the landscape, were the Olmec people, who left the idea inscribed in stone carvings made some 2,900 years ago, but also recorded much later in codices made by the Maya, the people of Teotihuacan, the Aztec, among others. As the ice melted during that last episode of global warming on Earth, large masses of rock emerged from under the ice cover, and they were drilled, cut, transported from one landscape to another by the waters generated by the melting ice, sometimes thousands of miles away. In some cases, it has been documented that 8,000, 10,000 miles away is the distance that they traveled. And in 2020, I made this piece that you see here, Glacial Erratic, a sculpture inspired by some of these ideas. It was shown in Rockefeller Center that you see here. And it was inspired by the glacial erratics that exist not far from that location in Central Park in New York City after their movement from places far north around Hudson Bay, etc. The sculpture is made of steel, and it evokes an erratic as it invites viewers to consider the long counts of time that are marked by the motions of the planet, the planetary nature of ancient migration, as well as the ways in which matter is marked by its location and its interaction with the world around it. During the last ice age, the melting ice opened grooves on the Manhattan bedrock and also deposited numerous glacial erratics on the landscape. And these large masses of rock, different mineral content in look, in size, in shape, from the native rocks in the local landscape. And visible all over the city, you can find them in Central Park, but also in Brooklyn, in Prospect Park, in Battle Hill, in the Bronx, and in Inwood Park, etc. The matter that forms these rocks documents their migration before the human era, as well as the moment in which they emerge from the ice cover. There's a sign at the Griffith Observatory that I love. It says, "The ancient history of the universe is written in a faint glow of cosmic background radiation." And so, as these rocks were exposed to the light and to cosmic rays, the erratics were also touched by radiation, generating a process that documents their migration and the passing of time. They also document another way in which mountains or large masses of rock move. Later on, I had the opportunity to see glacial erratic be moved from Rockefeller Center to the ICA in San Diego, where it resides permanently. It arrived there as part of a collaboration that I had envisioned with other artists, Candice Lynn, Rafa Esparza, Kang Song Lee, Pavitra Prasad, and Christian Tedeschi. The title of the exhibition was Glyph, because there was a glyph that represents the mountain. And what we were imagining as we worked on this exhibition was deep time. We were thinking about how mountains flow at a rhythm visible only in the long counts of time. People who carry the sacred memory migrate in different directions at different speeds and cross the landscape, come together with others and create, like other artists did before them, in the brevity of one human lifetime, or the fleeting moments set by the short counts of time. And in this landscape, at each moment, the different temporalities and the different paths come together. In other words, we thought about those moments of cosmic coexistence. I want to make a parenthesis here to say something about the particles that are part of the underworld. Of course, they reference the Maya underworld, the place of the lords of Xibalba that is described in the Popol Vuh. However, it is also a place where the decomposed bodies of the dead are. I grew up in a war in El Salvador, and during my childhood and my teenage years, I was in close proximity to where entire villages were massacred, and the underworld is therefore for me the place where the bodies of the dead are, where the bones of the dead are. And these dead, a great number of them are children, were innocent civilians killed in a preemptive move, and their killers have not paid for what they did. For instance, in the case of the massacre of El Mozote, even when Rufina Maya, a woman with enormous courage, survived the massacre by jumping into a ravine and was able to tell the world many times what she had witnessed, the legal system has not recognized the rights of the dead. But I want to evoke here the words of Spinoza, because he did not want to be subjugated to recognition or to modernity or to humanism. And he would say that it is not important if others recognize what might be the most precious thing to us. Inspired by Spinoza, is that I'm trying to pay attention to the concept of the underworld, the place where the bones exist under the surface of the earth, and to try to understand it outside Western humanism. And so I am trying to imagine the underworld as an impersonal space. And by this, I mean a space that is not meant for humans, a space where the earth holds all the dead from all the wars, the bones of our ancestors, the remnants of the Anthropocene, and all of it slowly becomes planetary, cosmic dust, self-organizing matter. There are infinite conversations happening on the planet and in the cosmos, and that are not meant for us, that are impersonal, that are meant for others, for non-human others. And for whatever parts of humanism I am unable to read myself, I also like to think that there is another justice, a planetary justice, that is recorded under the surface of the earth and in the atmosphere. Plants are also an important element in several of my sculptures, not only because they represent ancient technologies developed during other modernities, but because they are the intermediaries between the underworld and the cosmos, as well as the creators of atmospheres. For our exhibition titled Becoming Atmosphere, a collaboration between artists Kang Song Lee and I, the atmosphere emerged as the core of cosmic becoming, as a living entity that envelopes everything we know, a place where the potentialities of a life following the laws are freed from the constraints of identity. Considering Emanuele Coccia's argument that the atmosphere is the essence of cosmic fluidity, the deepest phase of our world, the one that reveals it as the infinite mixture of all things past, present, and future, we joined our creative powers to question the erasure of others that came before us and to imagine the entanglement of flows towards the future. It was Coccia who said that the entanglement of matter impacts the genetic codes of people in a similar way as words impact the mind. I love thinking that through the sending of messages towards unknown others, our minds can be entangled in an untimely conversation in spite of the distance and in spite of not knowing each other. Thinking of metamorphosis, Coccia argues that every conversation, each act of thinking is an exchange of spiritual identity, a mosaic of personalities and small subjects that come from elsewhere and that don't cease to travel. This was in part the idea behind a male art initiative titled Queer Correspondence, which is also based on the belief in generosity towards a collective unknown other as a form of becoming. For my participation in this project, I also collaborated with Kang Song Lee. We wrote letters to each other and then sent them to 650 recipients, I in text form and he in postcard form with his drawings. Some of the reflections that I included in my letters are about the term queer and queerness understood as horizon, to borrow the words of Jose Esteban Munoz, that is understood as future. I would like to read you some of these letters that unknown others also received. Dear Kang, May 21st, 2020. Today, another magazine defined me as queer in the title of an article. And in the introductory remarks, the article defined me as part of a we queer people that bothered me all day. It bothered me because it didn't understand the word queer the way I understand it, as a space of non-definition. It was meant as a category, as a defined identity, everything I always try to escape from, the opposite of being a nomad. I thought a lot about what the issue was for me. I think it bothered me that once again, an art institution had defined me, but more importantly, because it defined me as part of a collective where the color of my skin and my cultural memories were pushed to the background. I was not able to really digest my unease until I read a chapter titled Queerness as Horizon from Jose Esteban Muñoz's Cruising Utopia, where he presents a Deleuzian argument that Foucault also posed before dying. Quote, "We are not queer yet. Queerness, what we will really know as queerness, does not yet exist," end of quote. It was important to think about this because maybe queerness, when understood as future, as an imaginary of the future, is about dismantling the patriarchal structures and the gender binaries that are tied to humanism, but it is also about the construction of a more diverse we. Jose Esteban Muñoz continues to write, and I quote, "What I am suggesting is that we gain a greater conceptual and theoretical leverage if we see queerness as something that is not yet here," end of quote. I am writing this letter to you hoping to end my day with the thought of this invocation of a future collectivity, a queerness that registers as the illumination of a horizon of existence. Sending you love and futures, Beatriz. Dear Khan, May 29th, 2020. On the day of the opening of the Mundos Alternos Art and Science Fiction in the Americas, Rob Hernandez, who was one of the curators of the exhibition, found me admiring a display with Mundo Mesa's outfit. I was so proud to be in the same show as Mundo Mesa. He told me that Mundo was dying of AIDS in 1983 and that he had some visible lesions on his body and that he was not able to go out of his studio at the brewery, which is next door to my studio, and that he really missed going out. He said that it was going to be Halloween and that Mundo decided to make an outfit and go out wearing it. He and Jeff Huereque made an outfit that covered most of his body from view, and they went out to a place called Palette in West Hollywood. To me, the outfit looked like a mixture of a deep, shiny blue nightgown and a supersonic ant's head. Rob said that Mundo wore it and partied, and that he even won a competition of Halloween outfits that night. A little more than 3 months later, Mundo was dead. More than 30 years later, Jeff Huereque recreated the dress for the show. There is so much love in that story. It moved me so much. During the quarantine, I think a lot about Mundo Mesa cooked up at the brewery at a time when I was 12 years old. I think of him dancing with his supersonic ant nightgown, covering his skin and no longer being brown. I think of his desire to go out and party as a way to be alive. And I have been thinking a lot about his death post-quarantine and what it means to spend the last days of our lives locked up in our homes. I think about how time stands still and warps. I think about the time when I was 10 or 11 years old and I lived in El Salvador and I was probably playing hide and seek while Mundo Mesa and Ciclona were walking down Whittier Boulevard with glitter all over them, queering the neighborhood. I think of Mundo Mesa's erasure from Chicano art history, and I definitely think about how he complicates identity politics and nationalism, and about how at the end, he lived at the brewery in Lincoln Heights, not far away from East LA, not far away from West Hollywood, and that he didn't belong in either one of those neighborhoods. Not really. Sending love, Beatriz. Dear Khan, June 6, 2020. Yesterday, I attended a virtual panel titled The Fire This Time, Race at a Boiling Point. And it began with Herman Gray addressing the statement, "I can't breathe." He referenced this beautiful poem by Ross Gay. A small, needful fact is that Eric Gardner worked for some time at the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, He put gently into the earth some plants, which most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe. End of quote. It was painful and powerful to consider that even as Eric Gardner was murdered, even as he's no longer able to breathe, he left for us a world in which we can breathe better, symbolically and literally. I have been thinking a lot about the plants as the beings that enable our breath, about our species' mutual dependence. It brought me to think about the work of Emanuele Cortez in The Life of Plants, where he argues that plants are the creators of atmospheres. Of course, I have also been thinking a lot about the work that we are creating together for our exhibition, Becoming Atmosphere. And allow me to quote here a small excerpt from the show's description. In What is Real, Giorgio Agamben engages with the disappearance of brilliant physicist Ettore Majorana, who some believe dropped out of Enrico Fermi's program and of life in general when he realized that the recent discoveries in the area of nuclear fission would lead to the atomic bomb. Indeed, they did, and Enrico Fermi went on to work with Arthur Oppenheimer as part of the Manhattan program at the Los Alamos Research Lab in the creation of the first atomic bomb. However, Agamben argues that Majorana disappeared for reasons linked to the crumbling of humanism and Western reason, when he realized that everything he had learned in the field of physics and that the stability granted to reason and knowledge by the laws of physics was only true under certain conditions. In other words, he realized through his study of quantum mechanics that knowledge is not certain, that reality is truly speculative and probabilistic. In Becoming Atmosphere, Los Angeles-based artists Beatriz Cortez and Kang-Sung Lee imagine disappearance as a process of transformation, movement, nomadism, becoming. Considering the final work by Gilles Deleuze, Pure Immanence, the artists imagine freeing the potentialities of a life from the constraints of identity. Drawing from the writings of Emanuele Coccia, they consider the concept of the atmosphere as what Coccia calls the essence of cosmic fluidity, the deepest phase of our world, the one that reveals it as the infinite mixture of all things past, present, and future, and explore the idea of breathing as a statement against white supremacy and as a way to embrace in one's own breath all the matter of the world. It is so important to think about breathing as an act of resistance, of survival, but also about how porous our bodies are. With every breath, we absorb others, we breathe each other, we mix our bodies and all the matter of the world. With every breath, we fight against ideas like identity, purity, white supremacy, and we become nomadic. We flow towards the future in a process of becoming. As I write this, I'm sitting next to the small humidifier in the shape of a saguaro cactus that you got for me. It makes the atmosphere visible and it forces the particles of air and water to mix in my breath. Sending love, Beatriz. June 6, 2020. Dear Professor Gray, I want to thank you so much for the panel yesterday. My name is Beatriz. I'm a professor in the Department of Central American Studies at California State University, Northridge. I am an immigrant from El Salvador. I live in Los Angeles, where I am also a visual artist, a sculptor. I thought you were amazing and inspiring, and I wanted to quote what you said at the start of the panel about breathing, how you started the panel. But I didn't write down your exact words, and I thought the talk would be on YouTube afterwards because that's where I was watching it, but unfortunately it is not. Would you mind sending me your quote on breathing? I am writing about race and working on an art project for a gallery in London. And I wanted to quote you correctly. I wanted to connect what you said to a beautiful quote by Emanuele Coccia from The Life of Plants about how the atmosphere contains the infinite mixture of all things present and future. In other words, he makes a case against white supremacy. If you were improvising and you don't remember, I completely understand. Thank you so much for considering this request. And once again, for your amazing words yesterday, with my admiration and warm regards, Beatriz Cortez. June 7th, 2020. Hi, Beatriz. Thank you for reaching out and for your interest in the webinar and my opening comments. Here are the comments on breath and breathing that I used to introduce the webinar, which you can use with my permission. Eric Gardner, Breonna Taylor, I'm quoting now from him, and George Floyd, whose lives were stolen in the hands of state-sponsored violence, placed on our tongues and those of a movement, the words, "I can't breathe." I can't breathe powerfully expresses the conditions that define this moment of crisis and opportunity. Breathing, in terms of the environment and the polluted air and water and the environmental degradation that poor Black and brown people have to put up with in the US and over the world. Breath and breathing as the terms to understand the devastating health impact of the pandemic of COVID-19, which disproportionately attacks the respiratory system of Black, brown, poor, vulnerable populations and reaches into underfunded and overcrowded hospitals and emergency rooms. Breath also expresses the constricted air available to Black men, women, and children at the hands of police through illegal tactics like the chokehold and knees to the neck. Breath, which is constricted because of the stress and the strain of Black parents, grandparents, partners, and loved ones, whose daily life is often relegated to an overcrowded housing, under-resourced conditions, or detention centers where families are separated and where the joys of childhood are exchanged for the skills of everyday survival and uncertainty. Signed, Herman Gray, University of California Humanities Research Webinar, The Fire This Time. July 3rd, 2020. Dear Kang, for almost 2 months, we have been forming a coalition of Central American community organizations working in Los Angeles for immigrant rights. Together, these organizations selected a message for In Plain Sight to write in the sky over a border region in Texas, close to Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. Their beautiful message says, Makaka Sheikh Takib. Makaka Sheikh Takib means we will not be afraid in Quiche. It is an invitation to imagine a safe future for indigenous people from Central America and Mexico and for all. The use of this language is a statement of the survival of Maya people, particularly the Quiche, who are the majority of the indigenous immigrants from Central America in Los Angeles and in the United States. Writing in this language with smoke on the sky evokes the smoke rituals to communicate with the gods that were recorded in the Popol Vuh, the ancient sacred text of the Maya Quiche. Later on, Nancy Baker Cahill, an artist who designed an app to place artworks in augmented reality, and our dear Young Chong from Commonwealth and Council installed the same phrase in Quiche over the lake in MacArthur Park, the heart of the neighborhood that Central American people consider home. I am not sure if I expressed to them how much this means to people who have never been able to obtain a path to legalization, continue to live their lives in limbo without access to home ownership or stability. In Los Angeles, Central American peoples don't have a Central American district. Our home is Koreatown. I love that our peoples are together in this neighborhood of Los Angeles, and I love that through augmented reality, Central Americans got something that the city of Los Angeles never gave us, a permanent recognition of our presence in the city after all these decades. Makaka Sheikh Takib. Thank you for coming over to MacArthur Park, Kang. It was so moving to see young and old members of the community from different countries of origin, speaking different languages, people of different races, playing together with chalk on the street. Play is a way to suspend capitalism and Western reason. It was beautiful to be part of this day and to be surrounded by the music of the marimba jornaleros. All of us playing but writing a serious message because our communities are under attack, our families are divided, and unaccompanied children are being held in refrigerated cages in detention centers, the majority of them for profit. It is a great shame. It was beautiful to contribute to amplify the messages of these community organizations that have been working in Los Angeles and for decades for immigrant rights, to educate people about the historic reasons for the migration of Central American peoples to this country, to denounce the lack of legal path to legalization, to plead for the reunification of families, to fight for a comprehensive immigration reform. The community leaders inspire me. They are courageous and hardworking, and the newer generations, they are the future of the struggle. It was an honor to stand with them today, take the street without permits, to write in huge letters their message, defund ICE, surrounded by the huipalas, an ancient symbol of celebration of indigenous peoples in what some call the Americas, and they call Abiyala. We had so many volunteers, so much support from so many different people. When I finished the work today, I said to my friend Douglas, may we have lots of days like today. With love, Beatriz. July 5th, 2020. Dear Khan, on Friday after the immigrant detention day of action, Freya, Douglas, and I stayed at the MacArthur Park to wait for the sky-typing planes to fly over Los Angeles, delivering the messages that different artists had decided to place over downtown. I was paired with the Immigration Court on Olive by Pershing Square. I decided to write a bilingual phrase over Los Angeles. No cages, no jaulas. I chose this phrase because our communities have suffered one of the most despicable acts, the separation of children from their families. Our children are being held in refrigerated cages, surrounded by chain link, covering their bodies with mylar blankets, growing up alone, feeling abandoned, without being able to satisfy their most basic needs, physically and spiritually. They need to be released to their families who love them and miss them, and to their communities, so that we can be made whole again and so that they may heal. I have been thinking a lot about that moment when I watched the planes ride with their puffy white smoke disgrace, and how it flowed in the sky and dissolved into the atmosphere. It was moving and poetic. Love, Beatriz. Writing those letters, I was able to consider identity politics, the intersectionality of multiple identities in the making, always in the flow towards a future. The pandemic brought about discussions about breathing, healthcare rights, human rights, immigrant rights, the rights of communities of color. When George Floyd was murdered and rage and anger took our communities out of quarantine and into the streets. For long, I had been thinking about breathing as a way to question the possibilities of white supremacy, breathing as a way to move beyond the space of our bodies. Sending these packages in the mail allowed us to have these conversations with many others who received them days later and posted about them, responded, wrote back, etc. So as you can see, my work always returns to the concept of the untimely, which is about imagining a conversation happening with other realities and other possible presents, other possible pasts. It was Nietzsche's idea that he was untimely, or maybe it was Peter Osborne's question about who is our contemporary that made me imagine a group of people who spoke my same language. Many of them philosophers and artists, many of them living in different time periods and spaces. We have never met in person, but they are, and their words allow us to form a community through space and time. As they pop up in my mind while I go about doing my daily tasks, they have become some sort of my imaginary friends, my contemporaries. They help me make sense of uncharted territories. This concept of the untimely came to my world not only through the work of philosophers, but also through the conceptual worldviews of indigenous peoples. I am fortunate that I have been collaborating with a Cachiquel collective in the town of Patsisia in Guatemala that dedicates itself to the construction of memory, the memory of their dead, the memory of their town, the memory of their ancestors. I have known them for about 15 years now, and we have collaborated in several projects together. One particular project was a book that collected their ideas, their photographs, their objects, and included my reflections about our collaboration and their work on memory. The book, titled Cajay, includes an essay authored by the Cachiquel Research Collective, or Colectivo Cachiquel de Investigaciones, about ancient objects. In the story of creation preserved in the Popol Vuh, which is the sacred book of the Maya Quiché, The objects that were not treated well by the humans of their era rebelled. Hablaron todas sus tinajas, all of their jars spoke, sus comales, their clay griddles, sus platos, their plates, sus ollas, their pots, su nixtamal. Las piedras, the stones, los tenemastes que estaban en el fuego se lanzaron con ímpetu a sus cabezas. The cooking stones that were over the fire threw themselves with all their might over their heads. Les hicieron daño, they hurt them. Desesperados, desperate, corrían apresurados, they ran away hurriedly. Querían subir sobre las casas, they wanted to climb over the houses. Pero las casas se desmoronaban y ellos caían, but the houses would crumble and they would fall. Querían subir sobre los árboles, they wanted to climb over the trees, y los árboles los rechazaban and the trees rejected them. Querían entrar en las cuevas y las cuevas se cerraban ante ellos. They wanted to enter the caves and the caves would close in front of them. In a similar manner, the Cachiquel Research Collective explains in their text titled Objeto Antiguo, or ancient object, that ancient objects have a peculiar characteristic that makes them reveal themselves or to hide them from people. They possess kush, which can be translated as a soul, a center, an essence, a heart. In other words, it is the vital energy that all beings possess, human or not. One of the arguments presented in this essay is that through the daily coexistence of the quotidian use of the ancient objects, people in the community are able to form what I imagine as an untimely community with the ancestors. The authors provide us some examples, and I quote, Don Julian was digging a well and he found a large stone that later was used as an altar by the people in the community. And some visitors, researchers, have conducted studies of these objects and have called it Altar 1. Don Gavino found 2 carved stones in the shape of animals. He transported them to his house and decorated them, and he placed them in his patio under a lemon tree. He bathes them regularly. Don Toribio found a jade figure, and with it, he made a necklace. He added the image of a Catholic religious figure. Don Victoriano thinks that one must never remove the dirt from the ancient objects because it is part of their memory, and with it, they look better. Don Fermin has been lucky to find several stone objects in his land, and he has collected them and placed them in his garden and in other spaces in his home. Through this daily coexistence, the Cachiquel Research Collective reached some points that are parallel to what Karen Barad has argued in the entanglement of matter. Has argued is the entanglement of matter, or other scholars have argued about the vibrancy of matter from perspectives linked to philosophy or quantum mechanics. The objects are beings. They have wills. They decide when to show themselves and when to hide. They rebel and they can punish or they can protect. In order to coexist in community with the objects, the authors explain what we need is respect. By this, they mean that respect for ancient traditions is required in order for the objects to reveal themselves in all of their meanings and to function as portals for the formation of untimely communities with the ancestors. In the absence of such respect, the objects become merely archaeological artifacts, subjected to a realm that is no longer communal, but a university realm, an academic realm, or the realm of the state. However, within the community, these objects retain their powers to form communities across time and across space with the ancestors. They function as time machines. As the Cachiquel Research Collective argues, the objects embedded into daily life in the community also pose questions about the different ways to engage with objects, especially outside the academic realm of archaeology. During the pandemic, our collective, formed by Cajay, who were at the time 1 in Brazil, studying in Manaus, 2 in Patsicia in Guatemala, and by Fiebre, who are 2 young artists based in Mexico City, and myself, and the team in my studio, working from Los Angeles, our collective met every Tuesday for months. We loved the fact that we were spread across the Americas. Creating together opened up many possibilities of collaboration and to imagine collective subjects of the past, present, and future. My Cachiquel friends work in collective ways, so our decision-making moved at a slow pace. And it was important and a great privilege to spend each Tuesday afternoon together, shaping our collaboration and making work as we debated it, if calling it art was an act of colonialism, if objects made by a sculptor have push, and we engage with the idea that what emerges from under the earth has a will. Their way of understanding the underworld reminded me of a class lecture by Delos that spoke of metal workers, where he says that when a metal worker opens up a hole in the ground, the hole is not leading to emptiness, that another world, another reality pours out of that hole, and that this hole leads to simultaneity. One story that Ishmukane told us during one of the meetings impacted me in a peculiar way. She said that when she was younger, barely starting her studies at the university, that she had heard about a great ancient stone that was in the house of a family in Patsisia. So she went to that house and she knocked at the door and she said that she was coming to see the stone. Sure, come in, she was told. But when she entered, the stone that was shown to her was not the one that she imagined. And like this, it happened with other houses. In other words, in Patsisia and its surroundings, many Kachigel families coexist with ancient stones. They are part of their daily life, their daily way of seeing the world, and the daily conversations, and even, I imagine, of the memories that Kachigel migrants carry with them. I was impacted by the creation of Cabahuiles, or the Lords of the Mountains, that Eddie carried out because he who had joined our conversations from Brazil, where he was studying for his doctorate in anthropology, imagined a portable altar or a stone amulet that could protect him. And this made me think about the migrating stones, like glacial erratic, and through them, I also thought about migrating altars. But in the pandemic, these objects also allowed us to form a community with others known and unknown. In this temporality where the objects now are, but in other spaces. These are spaces that don't belong within the logic of capitalism and are not part of the modern ideas such as liberalism or imperialism. These spaces are also indigenous territory. They are linked to an ancient past, to an indigenous understanding of time and spirituality. To create and move these objects across territories that are also indigenous contributes to decolonize these spaces, to think them across time and to imagine for them other futures. This experience impacted me as I was working to make new body of work. Part of my solo show that opened that opened last month in Commonwealth and Council in Los Angeles. My exhibition titled One Eye Yes, One Eye No examines the Earth's movement and that of its inhabitants, the ceaseless circulation and transmutation of matter through vehicles such as volcanic eruptions and traveling meteors. In this way, I strive to pose that migration is a geological constant and that these fugitive self-organizing particles comprise all matter and align with conceptions of the ancient underworld. It also required to think of steel as an organic material that emerges from the earth, that is part of the extractive process that is killing the planet. To return it to its organic state is to return it to the earth, to return it to being stone, but it is also a way of becoming future. One central metaphor in this exhibition is the meteorite. Considered a cosmic missive, in this case, a meteor follows the pattern of a volcanic eruption and emerges from within the bowels of the earth onto the surface of the earth. By crossing this portal, the meteor reminds us that land, and therefore the cosmos, is in motion, always migrating. In this regard, Kocha poses an argument that resembles the beliefs of ancient peoples in the Americas, that we are adrift, that the entire planet is filled with geological sections adrift and in perpetual motion. He writes, there is no terra firme, there are no stable and definite forms. All the continents are floats in motion, boats that transform all the living beings from one side to the other of the planet, above and below the surface. From a planetary perspective, life migrates. And I would like to finish this presentation with an idea that engages with Claire Colebrook's machine geologists of the future, reading the sedimentation layers and the remnants of the Anthropocene. I began to ask myself, why wait? Why wait till the end of the Anthropocene? And I decided to become that explorer myself, that geologist, and to move through the world in search of other lives, but particularly as the pandemic began, in search of a volcano, Ilopango. The Ilopango volcano disappeared from the landscape of what is now El Salvador on a date that is estimated as the year 536. This large stratospheric volcano of an estimated height of 6,000 meters erupted in the tropics. At the site of the eruption, a caldera formed and filled with water, creating a beautiful lake. The particles of the volcanic eruption, also known as Tierra Blanca Joven, disseminated across the atmosphere, blocking the sun for several months and eventually falling on different landscapes around the planet. Some of these particles have been found in large urban centers, such as Mexico City, and some other particles were preserved under a thick layer of glacial ice in the Arctic and in Antarctica. The volcanic eruption and the devastation it produced stopped the artistic production of the Maya classical period in the region for several years. The survivors had to migrate in massive numbers out of the impacted area for decades. In what is now central Mexico, the great urban center of Teotihuacan was abandoned a few years after this eruption. In other parts of the world, the year 536 had a never-ending winter. Crops were lost and temperatures dropped, as was documented by the reduced size of the tree rings of that and the following year. The symptoms of a new disease spread. It was the beginning of the Justinian plague that devastated Constantinople. Among the Aztecs, the sun darkened. In Mesopotamia, large numbers of birds perished, and in some parts of China, snow fell during the summer months. This TBJ, or Tierra Blanca Joven, has spiritual meaning to the people who have migrated and continue to migrate from Central American region to other landscapes. These migrants of today walk the world, stepping over this land and these ashes, the particles of the underworld. In recent months, I have made several works related to the migration of the particles of this volcano. They include Ilopango, Stela B, and Ilopango, Stela A, which is the one that you're seeing now. One tells the story of migration of the volcanic particles, and the other one of the humans over the volcanic particles. I am interested in exploring speculative ideas that emerge when one considers that the Tierra Blanca Joven TBJ that was disseminated across the globe by the eruption of the Ilopango volcano is sacred and has spiritual meaning to the people who have migrated and continue to migrate from the Central American region to other landscapes that might be foreign, but that also contain particles of Mesoamerican soil, of the Mesoamerican sacred underworld of TBJ. My objective in searching cultural and historical documents that might illuminate us on the impact of this volcanic eruption is to imagine the cultural and conceptual impact of migration on the planet, on humans, on plants, on animals. These works are a tribute to the migration of matter and a metaphor for the porousness of bodies, our own, that of the earth, the cosmos, making visible that nothing is truly static. But I said before that there was a planetary justice. Standing here today, I would like to imagine that each beautiful place, that this forest that's next to me, that the place where you are in Malibu, the mountains, which already existed in the year 536 when Ilopango erupted, where the sun also darkened for 18 months, were showered with particles of the volcano and will continue to migrate adrift over a small portion of land in motion on the planet. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beatriz.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Not quietly there. Awesome.
I think we have a little bit of time, so maybe we can have a conversation. Do we?
Yeah, I would love that. So for everybody that's on here, if anybody has any questions, you can pop them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question. I had a couple I wanted to ask, but I want to put it out there for students first. Other guests. Also, if anybody that's in 402 wants to ask a question, you're on mute, so we can't hear you. So you might have to, there you go.
Lavender. Talk loudly and we'll hear you. Here, come over here. Talking to the trainer.
Oh, okay. Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, I saw the material that you mainly use are like, is that like bronze or like metal? For the stones, like, they manipulate like the stone type. So, it seems like your focus is mainly on immigration or like migration. Is it like something tied like mainly to like your experience particularly or to a social group? Like, does that make sense?
No, my work is about the migration of particles in deep time and other temporalities before humans existed. So in that sense, it really has nothing to do with me.
Oh, okay.
Because a human temporality is so small, and I don't believe in linking the work to my own identity. So I try to speak about things that have longer temporalities where I didn't exist yet. And imagine futures where I will not be and have conversations with others that I will never meet.
Thank you.
Because you're welcome.
Makes sense to
Thank
me.
you for your question.
Yeah. So I have another question. So it's
Uh-huh.
like, do you use like a stones, like a type of stone that you find? Because I saw there's one of the work that the stone looks like a body, like a human. But like, is it like naturally formed, or do you like make it to like blend with the nature? It's like it looks like a woman or a man laying down, like in the nature. There's some grass around it.
Well, I do see the stones like bodies, but I don't see them as humans because the stones have lives that are longer than humans. And actually to answer, that's a really great question too. Well, myself and the artists in the team in my studio, we go for walks. We find the rocks, then we make patterns with paper of the rocks, and then we go to the studio, we cut the rocks and beat them with round ball hammers over sacks of sand, trying to beat the industrialization out of the metal, and then we stitch them with the welder and put them back together. So the rocks are inspired by rocks in the world.
Oh, so you combine the stone and the metal together. Like,
No, I go see a rock and I use it to make a pattern, and then I go away and I make the stone rock in the studio.
oh, okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank
That's
you
very-
for your questions.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything you would like to know?
I see a hand raised.
Yeah,
So-
that's me.
Hi.
Hi. I had a question regarding something you said earlier. You said your art is trying to kind of go against this categorization by Western humanism. What exactly do you mean by Western humanism, and what are you trying to kind of push against for yourself?
Well, what I mean by Western humanism, that's a really great question, is liberalism, or what what we know as Western reason, which places a certain idea of the human at the center of thought. And I'm trying to imagine instead other modernities and other ways of thinking. And in order to do that, sometimes I try to imagine being other. Other from Western reason could be being looking at the world from the eyes of an indigenous community, looking at the world from the perspective of a rock or a glacial erratic, or the melting ice in the planet, etc. But anything that isn't Western humanism. And so all the ideas, for example, to give you an example, when you learn philosophy, I mean, when I was in 7th grade and I had philosophy class, the first thing we learned was Plato, even though Plato is not the genealogy, it's not the father of philosophy. I mean, there's other philosophers, other thinkers. I was taking that class in El Salvador. There's other thinkers in that region, but still we imagine this genealogy towards the Greek and towards then later the French Revolution and liberalism as the way to understand thinking. And so I'm trying to find a way to step outside that. And identities are part of that logic of liberalism. So I am not interested in defining my identity, and I am not interested in my identity defining my work. That's why I was saying my work is really not about me.
So you're essentially trying to kind of focus more on art based off your roots and your community as opposed to maybe that of the Western world?
No, I am not trying to talk about my roots or my community because I haven't defined my roots or my community. So I am trying to look at lots of different groups of people that might have other perspectives that are not Western reason.
Okay.
And some of those perspectives are not non-human. So that's why this kind of thought is known as post-humanism or non-human perspectives, because what we understand as human has nothing to do with humans and flesh and bone. It has to do with the construction or the idea of humans that comes from Western reason, liberalism, the Renaissance, the Vitruvian man that Da Vinci made, things like that, you know?
So
And in that way, they're narrow, provincial, and I am trying to step away from that. But it's a very provincial and small component of all the thought that exists in the world.
so it's more like kind of putting yourself in the position of something that is not human.
Yes, super exciting to have machine eyes, to have to see the world as if you were an object, to imagine the earth when humans no longer are here, who would look at it, and how, what would be the remnants of our passing through the earth, etc.
All right. Thank you.
No, thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Alex. Anybody else?
Yeah, Kate, can I jump in with a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Beatrice, that was amazing. Thanks so much. I'm
Thank
curious
you.
about as much as your work, as you just said, is countering or working around or against Western humanism, neoliberalism, or even working towards like a non-human direction. Your work also seems so much to be about these speculative communities, these real communities. I'm also curious about how you operate within like these art systems as well. It seems like you have maybe a nuanced perspective, or you address the like art communities that you work within in a pretty interesting way. I was curious if you could share a little bit about that.
Well, I think what's really important about art communities is that, and institutions, is that they are also made of the people that work there. And so even though institutions are oftentimes inflexible or inscribed within modernity or made with Greek columns, the people that work there are oftentimes the ones that have ideas similar to mine and want to change what's inside there. And so just as institutions can be oppressive, there are people inside that are allies that can allow me to speak in the terms that I want. And sometimes I need to place my work outdoors. Sometimes I need to consider questioning or expanding what art might mean, etc. So there's different ways in which, for each situation and each kind of body of work, I try to think of ways to expand what art means, so that art is something that is not only part of a tradition of liberalism, like a discipline, but is something that opens up to non-human perspectives, that opens up to multiple temporalities, that allows us to dream that in the future, indigenous peoples survive.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Cool, thanks, John. Any other last questions? I want to be cognizant of time. I had a super quick question. If nobody else is going to jump in, I can talk to Beatriz a lot later about a lot of this too, but just for our seniors in particular, I was just thinking, do you have any sort of advice or any sort of wisdom as far as just how, you know, a lot of these seniors that are sort of like experimenting with materials, just how they can maybe think through working with a lot of different types of things? Like you work with steel and soil and seeds and like all these different things, and video and just all these different really interesting materials. And I'm just wondering if you have like some practical advice for some of them that might be interested in kind of going that route but aren't really sure how to start.
Well, it's difficult to say how I myself started, but I think there's everything around us can be our teacher. And I think what for me has been important is that in daily life, I try to listen to the lessons that each day brings me and try to consider how they might be bringing post-human, non-human, future perspectives, and try to pay attention to that, engage in that conversation, so that we might have been told, all of us at some point in I don't know, in some class, that art needs to be a certain way, that it needs to be installed on a pedestal a certain way, but how to broaden that is really important, and how to expand that so that the people that I also want to engage in conversation with can access the works, can see materials that reflect their lives in their works, and can find the knowledge that is embedded in matter in the works. Because matter contains knowledge and contains travels and entanglements that are filled with lessons. And so I just try to listen, but I don't know how that began. I just think I just like to observe the world.
You know, I think that's great.
Give value to the knowledge that common people have, that the value that of the messages that animals teach us, and plants and objects.
I love that. I think that'll serve as some good inspiration for a lot of our seniors and some of our juniors that are in here too. All right, so I think we will go ahead and, Beatriz, I want to let you have a break before jumping into studio or the one-on-one virtual visits. So if you want to take like whatever you need, 5, 10, and then
I'll just take 5, but I wanted to ask you, do I stay in this Zoom meeting?
What was that?
I'm gonna just take 5 minutes, but do I stay in this Zoom meeting?
Yeah, go ahead and stay in this
Okay.
one. I'll put you in breakout rooms with some of the students that we have on the sign-up sheet.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
cool. Yeah, fantastic.
And it's so
Thanks
nice
much,
to see you,
Beatriz.
Andrea, and thank you all.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.